I'm here with Chris Barrett, President and CEO at the Pocono Mountains Visitors Bureau. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that.
So the Pocono Mountains covers a large area covering several counties in Pennsylvania. Could you just describe some of the attractions that are included in the Pocono Mountains and what parts of Pennsylvania does it actually encompass?
Sure. So we represent four counties, Carbon, Monroe, Wayne, and Pike, and it's 2,400 square miles of area. It's equivalent to the state of Delaware. Multiple attractions in this market. We have the most state and federal parks in one area, beautiful outdoor activities here. The Delaware River, the Lehigh River runs through the Pocono Mountains. It's one of the most streamed areas in the state. So our outdoor activities are great. Also, a number of indoor activities. We have the largest indoor water park in the United States up here, Kalahari. We have four fantastic water parks that are all indoor, and ski resorts. So we have a number of national and world-renowned ski resorts right here in the Poconos. So many things to do for every season.
And from the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, how much of those attractions have you been able to keep open and available to the public, and how much has had to be closed?
So our economy in the Pocono Mountains, our number one industry is hospitality and tourism. So almost immediately in March, thousands of our businesses closed and unfortunately furloughed thousands of people. So it was devastating for us, and still is, initially, to come to such a screeching halt because of the pandemic. So from an economic standpoint, it was really, really tough. And then, of course, all the things that come along with that, everyone's staying at home. They all of a sudden have become a teacher to their children. They're still balancing work. If they're working from home or if they're furloughed, they're wondering if they're going back. So it was, for us, as I'm sure it was for a lot of parts of the Commonwealth, it was extremely tough. But again, because of our economy is so heavily based on tourism and hospitality, we probably were hit a lot harder initially from an unemployment standpoint.
And what about from an infection standpoint? Are you aware of many cases in your own attractions of COVID-19?
No, I think like a lot of other counties in Pennsylvania, the nursing homes obviously were hit fairly hard. There was a higher percentage of positive cases coming out of those, but also we're very much there's a lot of folks who have second homes in the Poconos who come from New York and New Jersey. So initially there was a little case bump related to that, but they live here. Some of them live here actually most of the year or work in New York in the city and commute back and forth. So initially, we were considered a fairly strong hotspot, but our Visitors Bureau actually took on a new role of being a public information source as a public information officer for the four counties. So we actually built a website, which it's still active, poconomountains.com/COVID-19, and we warehoused everything on that site that anyone should need to know about the virus, whether you're a business, you're an individual, really didn't matter. And then we partnered with our local hospital systems and a lot of state and local governments and school districts, and really started to get the message out. We really pushed out a very strong public service campaign, and initially it was to flatten the curve, and then it kind of morphed, over the 2-month period, because we wanted to really, really concentrate on getting the curve flattened so that we can get our folks back to work again and restart the economy.
So as counties in Pennsylvania start to transition from red to yellow to green, you had businesses in the Pocono Mountains area sign something called the Pocono Promise. Can you describe what that initiative is doing?
So as the red and phase started to really progress and we started to see some light to the yellow phase, we put a team of local individuals together who are highly skilled to start to look at the question of reopening our businesses. And out of that process came the Pocono Promise. It's a totally voluntary program. And we invited about 172,000 businesses that had email addresses in all four counties to voluntarily get onto this program. And we also established another website, poconomountains.com/reopening. And there we warehoused everything you would need as a business, whether you were hospitality based or not, to reopen. We had some folks with public health background. Our hospitals looked at it, and a lot of our other partners had input into it. And the promise is based upon folks agreeing voluntarily to comply with CDC guidelines, and even in a lot of cases exceed those, and to really ensure that the team members working in those properties, as well as the guests visiting them, had a feel of safety and comfort when they're visiting the Pocono Mountains. And there's also an out-facing component to the guest as a code of conduct. So knowing that when they visit us, they have to be masked, they have to follow good guidelines in order to mitigate. So it was a really great program, and we had folks from all sectors. We have, I think, about close to 300 businesses that have signed on to it, and there's more and more every day. And they're all across the spectrum. We have dental practices, we have hospitals, we have anything you could think of along with our hospitality businesses that have signed on to the promise. We actually have some other folks close to us. The Lehigh Valley Chamber is doing a similar program, and other convention visitors bureaus across Pennsylvania. It's a way we can help to ensure that folks are complying by the CDC guidelines to protect their own team members, but also when we market to folks in New York and New Jersey, Baltimore and Washington, and the Harrisburg, Lebanon, Lancaster, York area, we use the Pocono Promise so that those folks know, hey, the people in the Poconos take CDC guidelines seriously, and they really stand by them, and they really stand by the fact that they need to mitigate. So that's really was the beauty of the Pocono Promise, and continues to be.
As guests begin to return to the attractions in the Pocono Mountains, what kinds of changes will they notice, or different things will they notice when they visit?
Well, I think immediately they'll notice social distancing, and the outreach before they visit the property will probably be different, in the sense that the properties will also be saying that they do expect that the guests really follow the guidelines of the property and adhering to CDC guidelines and social distancing, and plus the capacities of some of the properties. In the green phase, if you're not open in the yellow phase, for instance, a resort can only open to 50% of its capacity in some of the other attractions, such as our water parks. And that'll probably change as we continue through the green phase. But right now, there are going to be differences. Some of the amenities will look different because of social distancing. But the great news is that so many of our operators up here in the Poconos have really been innovative with how they've decided to operate, as things begin to reopen. And some of the things that they're doing are just incredible. So they're actually trying to make it as seamless for the guest as possible to visit and to have a great time with their families, but also to feel safe and comfortable when they're here. So it's in some ways it's been heartbreaking, but in some ways it's been inspiring when you look at the innovation and the grit and the determination that a lot of our members and resort owners and business owners in the Poconos that run all types of businesses, large and small, have done in this trying time.
Being a full year attraction, when do you anticipate that the Pocono Mountains will be able to operate again at full capacity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That we know that from previous visits, to about 28 million people visit the Pocono Mountains yearly. And it's interesting that it's a pretty even distribution, like 24-25% visit in each individual season. So we have a very strong summer season, very strong fall and winter, of course, with our ski areas reopening. And in the fall, people love to see the leaves turn in the mountains, and there's all types of events and festivals. That's one of the things that we know will get affected quite immediately. There probably will not be the gatherings and festivals that folks are used to, but that's everywhere. We're seeing a lot of them have been canceled. Some of them are coming back slowly, like 4th of July celebrations, those types of things. But fairs have been affected. Wine festivals have been affected, you name it, because in the new guidance, folks are limited to 250 people at any one gathering. And of course, they have to social distance, which means you need a lot of land area in order to be able to do that. So, we really think that as we get through the green phase and we get more direction, maybe we're at 75% by the winter, between 50 to 75%. We're projecting that in the first quarter of 2021, maybe into the second, we'll get back to kind of almost where we were before in 2020, in that first quarter before this really hit us.
And moving forward, you're about to go into the summer season, which is a popular season for your attractions. What are the biggest challenges or obstacles that you anticipate you're going to have to face?
One of the challenges has been interpreting the guidelines and interpreting them correctly, because our operators really have always wanted to color in between the lines and follow the direction of the Department of Health and the governor's direction. So, and our local and state officials have felt the same way. And we understand it's been tough for the governor and the Department of Health. It's a lot of stress. There's, a lot of responsibility there. So it's not a fault of theirs. But, we, as a larger operations, we're always seeking the correct guidelines in order to open in the safest way possible. So, and again, this isn't something hopefully we'll never have to go through again, but it's something nobody's really gone through in their lifetime. So that has probably been the most challenging part. And we learn more as time goes on. So week after week after week, we learn more, about how, and again, the innovation comes in with our owners and operators. I mean, they're very, very innovative. And I think they're entrepreneurial, and that's why they're where they are. And they're finding ways to be able to obviously color in between the lines with the guidelines, but, to operate effectively and efficiently. And it's been great to see.
All right, Chris Barrett, President and CEO of the Pocono Mountains Visitors Bureau. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
For 25 years, PCN Tours has provided Pennsylvanians with a look into manufacturing businesses across the Commonwealth. Each episode is led by a company expert, giving you an unscripted, in-person experience. Watch what makes Pennsylvania a unique and exciting place to work and the opportunities it presents with PCN Tours, on cable and streaming. PCN, Pennsylvania History and Culture.
I'm here with Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, Democrat from Philadelphia. Thank you for being with us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
With Philadelphia being one of the epicenters of the COVID-19 pandemic in Pennsylvania, and with stay-at-home orders soon to be lifted, what are some of your concerns about reopening in the city?
So, the question has always been about how we reopen, not whether we reopen. I think that at this point, the city is working through the policy in terms of what types of stores will be reopened, what are going to be the guidelines around who can go in, how are workers going to be protected, and I think we're making a lot of progress. And so, I'm looking forward to us continuing to do this in a methodical way. The governor has taken a regional approach to reopening, which is wise, following the science, listening to the public health experts, and then crafting policy that is in line with the advice that they're giving to policymaking officials. And so I think the advice that they're giving right now was that, we can start to lift some of these restrictions, but it's going to require us to do it in small groups. We probably won't have a stadium open for a while. We'll probably have to figure out ways for schools to have some flexibility as they start thinking about the school year. For example, Temple University in my district is going to be reopening, but some of the bigger classes are going to be moved online, and then some of the smaller classes are going to be put into larger rooms to ensure that there's adequate social distancing. And so that's what I've wanted, and Democratic colleagues have wanted all along. Let's do this in a way that's smart. Let's do this in a way that's safe, and let's do this in a way that's guided by science.
You recently had a kind of viral online moment when a video of you speaking on the House floor advocating for low-wage workers. What are some things that you would like to see the House to do to continue to advocate for these low-wage workers?
Well, I'd love for us to not have to have a video go viral for us to talk about workers' rights, for us to talk about paying folks a living wage, for us to talk about paid leave and sick leave, all things that should be part and parcel to how we do business. And unfortunately, it's not. If you look at the policy coming out of the Republican-led chamber right now, it has been a lot more about what do folks who are well off and well connected want, and not what's going to be in the health, welfare, and safety of the folks who are doing the jobs. And as I was saying before, Of course, listen, folks want to get back to restaurants and bars. I want to get back to bars because sometimes these folks drive me to need a little cocktail. But I don't want to be there at the expense of somebody being sick. And so we've done things like open up to go at some of our bars so folks can take spirits to go. The governor has ensured in his regulations that store owners have to provide adequate PPE, and he's created a whole portal for folks to go in who don't know where they can get the PPE to help make those relationships and connections. That's the type of approach we've always needed to take. The governor has been moving in that way, but every step of the way, obviously, some of my colleagues wanted to go in another direction. And the hypocrisy that I was bringing up in that moment is that these same service workers that we want to send back to work immediately are the same folks whose lives and livelihoods, whose lack of living wages are so often ignored by the Republican majority.
This week, there was also controversy in the House when it was revealed that Representative Andrew Lewis actually tested positive for COVID-19, and several of his Democratic colleagues were unaware. You actually serve on the same committee with him. What was your reaction to these revelations?
Well, all of us were unaware, and many rank and file Republican members were unaware. As I've said multiple times, we need two things. We need answers, and then we need accountability. We need to know who knew what when and what they did when they found out. We still don't have those answers. And again, I know I've already said hypocrisy once, but it's glaring and it's repeated by the Republican leadership. These are folks who have said to people, oh, it's fine, just go back to work, everybody will be safe, everything will be great, and we aren't safe where we work. That is unacceptable. And so this has sparked a broader conversation about how we ensure the health, safety, and well-being of everybody in the Capitol. We have to look at things like doing temperature checks before anybody comes into the building. I think every single person who served on the state government committee should have gone and got tested. I went and got tested, and thank God the results were negative. But you can't play politics with public health, and unfortunately, that's happened.
Just this week, you were actually renominated to your seat in the House. In speaking to people in your district, what are some of their biggest concerns about COVID-19 and the future in general?
At the end of the day, what folks recognize right now is that we can't go back to the normal that got us to where we are, a normal that paid women pennies on the dollar to men, a normal that allows folks to work for what I consider starvation level wages, a normal that allows our law enforcement officers to act with impunity and to not be held accountable when there's a clear recognition that something has gone wrong and that either mistakes have been made or folks have actively chosen to do something they shouldn't be doing. People are out right now protesting, a majority of it peaceful protest, demanding that our country actually live up to the values that we've espoused in all these beautiful flowery documents that were written in a hot summer here in Philadelphia. We have to make those documents real in our lifetime, and that's what people are asking for. Am I going to be able to have a good idea, have a dream, and be able to pursue it? Or are we going to continue to have a system where Black and brown folks can't get access to capital to start an enterprise? Are folks going to be able to have individuals in their family who get sick and not go bankrupt and not be blocked out from care? Folks are asking the question, are we going to be able to send our kids to schools where there is no worry about asbestos falling from the ceiling like rain or lead in the water? Folks are asking the question, are we going to do something about affordable housing and making sure we have a housing stock that actually covers everybody, that housing is right for everybody? Those are the types of questions that people are asking in my district, and it's the types of things that they're demanding right now in the streets.
On that topic, people are protesting right now the murder of George Floyd. What was your reaction to that video and the news, and how are people in Philadelphia reacting?
You know what? Honestly, a big part of me wish I hadn't watched the video because I cried and cried after I watched it. It was heartbreaking to see yet another Black man who could very well be me or be my partner brutally murdered in broad daylight. And folks have been quicker to condemn unrest than they've been quick to condemn the murder of an unarmed Black man. And it's happened again and again and again. And I'm heartsick by it. I'm sick to my stomach, but I'm sick of being sick. And that's how a lot of people feel. And that's what's being said. But as I said at the beginning of this, it's not just about police misconduct. It's also about economic justice and fairness. And we have parts of my district right now where the average annual income, about $9,000, $10,000 a year. A year. Think about that. And for folks who are watching, they ought to think about that. Imagine having to survive on $9,000 to $10,000 a year, working a job and still not able to get by. That's the reality for so many people in Pennsylvania. And if you look at the disparities in terms of folks who've lost their job during this COVID crisis, those folks have been primarily Black and brown. And so certainly people are protesting the horrific, horrific murder of George Floyd, but they're also talking about a system of structural inequality that we have to dismantle.
And finally, there's so much going on right now, but it is June, so it's Pride Month. What are some ways, well, in Philadelphia, the Pride Parade and many other parades are still canceled. What are some ways that people can continue to learn and talk and engage with the LGBTQ community this month?
Well, listen, Pride is a year-long thing from my perspective. When I got elected as the first openly LGBTQ person of color, that was a big deal. And when I walk into rooms and have conversations, the conversation is different because my lived experience is different. And I think that what we ought to be doing, and during Pride Month and every month, is ensuring that our businesses, our government, our civic society, our nonprofits, that our police forces, that they actually look like the folks they're going to serve. And that means having folks in the room who come from a variety of different lived experiences. And ultimately, again, people are demanding that now. They're demanding it. And I think that that's a part of the way we've created change over time, people protesting and saying they want something different. And so what I encourage folks to do is to remember that Pride started out as a riot, that what we need to do for the LGBTQ community did not stop at marriage equality, and that there are still so many issues that we need to tackle, and so many issues that folks who care and who are looking at saying, hey, listen, I'm not a bad person, I just didn't recognize all the things that were going on. For those folks, hey, listen, we have bills right now around hate crime legislation. We have bills right now around getting true non-discrimination in Pennsylvania. I would encourage people to reach out to Speaker Terzai, reach out to Majority Leader Cutler, and ask that in the spirit of Pride Month, that you bring up those bills.
All right, Representative Malcolm Kenyatta from Philadelphia, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Join our guests for insights on issues impacting local government and the citizens of Pennsylvania. Created by the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs, Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs connects you to legislation and policy that will affect you and your family. Your host, Chris Kapp, and his guests discuss current affairs that matter to you most. Connect with your state by tuning into Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs on Sundays here on PCN.
I'm here with Dr. Adrienne Woods, postdoctoral fellow at the Penn State College of Education. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So for some background, for students with special needs, what sorts of educational resources are usually available to them in school beyond the regular classroom curriculum?
Sure. So About 16% of Pennsylvania's children have special needs, and so they receive special education services in school. There's different types of supports and services depending on what the child's educational needs are. Most children have what's called an individualized education plan. So this is a document that is, it's a legal contract between the child, the parents, the teachers, special educators, school counselors. A number of people are involved in creating this. And it's essentially just a document that says what sort of supports and services the school is legally going to provide to the student based on their disability, based on their educational needs. So of course that looks different for many students, right? Because disability is such a broad term. So it really depends on what the student's needs are, what sort of resources they get in schools. Common examples of resources might be different therapies like speech and language therapy or occupational therapies, maybe a classroom aide to help them, or someone who sits in on classrooms and just helps adjust the curriculum depending on the student's needs. So it can be pretty diverse depending on what they need to be successful in school.
So with schools being closed due to COVID-19, what kinds of challenges come with providing that same kind of education to those students with special needs at home?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of challenges that all students are facing right now, for sure. This is definitely uncharted territory. You know, a lot of the things that students with disabilities are facing, most students are facing, things like challenges with working remotely, maybe internet connectivity issues, adapting curriculum to be in a remote setting. One of the specific challenges I've known is that based on evidence-based research, there's something from the Office of Special Education Programs and Ideas That Work program. They looked at how many empirical studies have been done looking at online learning for students with disabilities, and they found since 2012, there's only been about 6 studies that have looked at online learning. So it's really uncharted territory. There are things that can exacerbate this, especially for kids who are food insecure or parents who might be essential workers who can't be at home working with a kid every day, or maybe they have non-standard work hours. Maybe the child is in an unstable or volatile home environment. All these things will exacerbate what's already going on, the challenges that are present for COVID-19. Specifically for kids with disabilities, I would say that accessibility issues are kinds of the first things that come to mind when you think about what might be challenging above and beyond those stressors that already exist. Many students with disabilities have difficulties with memory, with things like executive function, self-regulation, expressive and receptive language, things that can impair their ability to learn the same way that their typically developing peers might learn. Students who are visually impaired often will rely on accessible web pages and content. So teachers who are providing web pages for their students might be needing to think a bit more critically about how to reach some students who might have troubles accessing those pages. So there are a lot of issues that are going on. Even beyond the problems with internet connectivity, students with disabilities might be affected behaviorally or emotionally in ways that are somewhat unforeseen. Again, it's uncharted territory. So we're all in a stressful time, and some students with disabilities who have troubles with transitions, for instance, might be picking up on how different the world is today, and that might be adding a lot of stress into their lives that can be hard to deal with and can impair learning.
Can you provide some background on what the Special Education Act does and how it's contributing to the way that schools and special education educators and parents are providing education for students at the moment?
Sure. So the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the very first iteration of this was passed in 1975, so really not that long ago, and there have been several revisions to this act that have been passed in years since. The current version specifies that students with disabilities are required to a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment possible. So the environment that is closest to a general ed classroom according to what their specific needs are. In 2017, the US Supreme Court actually ruled on a case that special education services need to be adequate enough that students with disabilities are actually making educational progress appropriate to their circumstances. So it's not enough to just have a child with a disability access the curriculum. The curriculum has to be such that the child with disability is actually learning, and they're measuring how the child is learning. So there are again, like I've said before, this is completely uncharted territory. And previously, there were no legal mandates for what schools should do in the case of something like a global pandemic. There was no mandate for whether a school was required to continue providing special education services and working with students and creating IEPs in the case of extended school closures like this. The good news is the U.S. Department of Education in March released guidelines about what to do. There were some schools right at the beginning of this, and I know there are places, states were having families sign waivers saying that they weren't going to sue school districts if their special education services weren't delivered, or that they wouldn't sue school districts in order to get special education services. And the Department of Education declined to pursue that, to say you still have to provide services for students with disabilities. If your school is continuing to provide educational services to the general population of students, you should be providing equal access to special education services in accordance with the student's IEP. This even includes situations in which a student with a disability might contract COVID-19, or they might be more susceptible to COVID-19 based on a medical issue. So if there's any sort of medical absence that lasts longer than 10 consecutive days, the school has to review the child's IEP. They have to have an update regarding placements and services and IEP goals. And that was in place prior to the COVID-19 pandemic.
In your research, you make reference to something called the summer slide, which is that inevitable sort of loss of knowledge that kids face when they're away from school over the summer. How are schools going to take that into account, especially for not only the summertime, but the loss of being in school due to COVID-19, especially for students with disabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. There has been some research that's come out using the MAP growth assessments that all students take, I think, between 3rd and 8th grade. It's projected that some students are expected to be almost a full year behind in mathematics by the end of this. Reading is also going to be behind, but not quite as bad. One of the reasons for that, researchers are speculating, is because there are more literacy activities that parents do in the home with their child than they do math activities. So parents more often read to their child, they more often tell stories and encourage their child to read independently, but they don't do as many math activities. So one thing that families can do is specifically work on math, specifically find ways to incorporate math into their day-to-day life. And there are great resources and examples for how to do this. The Office of Special Education Programs has an Ideas That Work series that can provide all of these sort of resources for what parents can do with kids of all different ages. And schools can be prepared for that, especially with math coming in the fall. Schools are going to have to start preparing now for the fact that kids are going to come back behind, and not just all kids will come back a little bit behind, right, for the most part, but students with disabilities might be disproportionately affected by this because they have additional learning supports that need to be implemented that might not be being implemented right now. So there are a couple of things that I think schools can do. The first thing is to plan to reevaluate and review all IEPs once the children come back in the fall. IEPs are required to be reviewed at least annually, and then every 36 months there's a reevaluation that happens, and schools may want to consider doing that reevaluation, or at least reviewing these IEPs as soon as they can within the start of the next school year. General education teachers and special education teachers should be planning now for how they're going to work with students with disabilities. They should be creating contingency plans with families for summer learning. That might be things like hiring a summer tutor. It might be activities to do with the child. It might be ways to assess where the child is right now with their learning and what needs to happen before the fall rolls around. I think this transition back to school needs to be supported both academically and emotionally, and that needs to come with a lot of communication. So I know a lot of schools are planning on hiring additional support services like counselors and psychologists to support students with disabilities and all students, both mentally and emotionally and physically as they transition back to school. And this might be especially appropriate for students who are receiving special education services.
And what are some ways that the government has tried to address this issue, this disparity between providing education, particularly for students with special education needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, the Department of Education released guidance in March 2020, specifically on students with disabilities and teaching these students during the COVID-19 pandemic, things like what schools should be continuing to do, what they were legally required to do. The U.S. Department of Education did not release schools from their obligation to provide special education services, especially if they're already providing education to their other students. They need to continue doing so for students with disabilities. I know in the state of Pennsylvania, there's, I believe, $5 million have been set aside for schools. That funding is going to go to schools that need it versus schools who are serving populations of marginalized communities, the highest proportion of students who might lack access to educational resources. But a significant portion of that funding should be reserved for students with disabilities. Students with disabilities and students who receive special ed cost on average about twice as much as students without disabilities, just because they get extra supports and services in schools. And so schools need to be sure that if they get any of that additional funding set aside, it should be earmarked specifically for those supports and services, especially because students with disabilities may be coming back to school more behind than their peers.
All right, Dr. Adrienne Woods, postdoctoral fellow at the Penn State College of Education. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.